Good morning, everyone, and happy World Oceans Day. Welcome to another Exploring Oceans by the Seat of Your Pants hangout. Today is all about celebrating our oceans and bringing some of the world's leading scientists, explorers, and conservationists into classrooms to share the wonder of our oceans and why we need to protect them. So my name's Joe Grabowski. I'll be your host today, and I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Mark Erdmann today. So Mark's work largely focuses on the management of marine protected areas, as well as research of reef fish, mantis shrimp biodiversity, and satellite tracking of endangered sharks and rays. He's the Vice President of Conservation International's Asia Pacific Marine Programs. He's an avid diver, having logged over 10,000 scuba dives. That's amazing. While surveying marine biodiversity in the region. He's been involved in discovering and describing over 150 new species of reef fish and mantis shrimp. In the process of all these amazing dives, he's published over 140 scientific articles and 4 books. And he's been a scientific advisor to numerous natural history documentary films for groups like the BBC and National Geographic. So Mark, it's an absolute pleasure to have you joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Just real quickly, I apologize about the lack of capabilities here.
So we may run into this a little bit today. Mark is calling from Papua New Guinea, so the signal isn't the best. So we're going to work through it the best we can here. We usually get nice spurts. We did a test call the other day of good voice contact, so we'll do that, and we'll hope that it works out for us today. So Mark, I don't know if you caught that. We've just had your voice drop out for a moment. Okay, so like I said, we're exploring by the seat of our pants. We had a really good connection yesterday with voice, and I hope that we get it today. So Mark, are you back? Mark, can you hear me? All right, it looks like the internet just isn't going to maybe be as cooperative as yesterday, but we'll give it another go, and if not, we'll go to plan B if things just don't work out. But the way I feel about things like this is it's better to try and see what happens. We'll give Mark another second. Mark, any luck? Mark, can you hear me?
Okay.
Hi, Mark, can you hear me?
Can you hear?
We can, Mark, but it doesn't seem like we're going to get as lucky as yesterday or the other day. I'm going to try turning off all the cameras and see if that gives us a little bandwidth. So classrooms, if you see your cameras turn off, don't panic. You're still here. You've just gone quiet. See if we can get Mark a little more bandwidth. Viewers who are just tuning in, I can see you're tuning in. We're trying to connect with Mark from Papua New Guinea. We had a really good voice call the other day, but it appears that we might not have as much luck today. And if that does happen, we do have a backup plan that we'll go to in a minute or two with a presentation from my end. So we'll just see what happens. So I've turned off the video cameras, and that might help us.
Okay, Joe, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Mark.
Okay.
Still there?
That's a good progress. I'm here.
Yeah. Why don't you just start presenting? I mean, if it drops out again, we'll deal with it at that time. Maybe we'll have to go to plan B for today, but let's start presenting and see what happens. Sound good?
Okay. you have my PowerPoint?
I do have it here, Mark. Let me know if you can see it as it pops up. I'll give the screen a share, and you let me know. Okay, Mark, can you see that?
I can see that it's on. Yeah, I can.
Okay. All right, let's go. Full screen.
Okay. All righty. So again, good morning, everyone, and my apologies for this video. Hopefully, hear me and not too much here.
Mark, I'm gonna stop there, Mark. Mark, it's not working for us today. We can't get any clear sound signal today.
Okay, no worries, gotcha.
I'm sorry, Mark. I tried with the presentation open. It just turns to full robot mode, and then
no problem.
So we'll plan something for September, but I'll go ahead with our backup plan on this side. But Mark, I appreciate so much the effort trying to make this work today, but it's just, yeah, we're not catching anything.
No worries. Happy Oceans Day.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. We'll go ahead with plan B. Sorry, Mark. Okay, so boys and girls, I do apologize to those who are watching live. That's the risk you take when you try to connect with somewhere so far away, but there's no sense in us trying to watch the presentation if we can't hear anything. So we're going to go to plan B, which I do have ready here. So I introduced myself at the beginning. I'm a school teacher. I'm an avid scuba diver. I'm also the founder of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So over the years, I've been able to do a lot of fun diving around the world. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to do a little presentation of some of the cool things that I've been able to see around the world, and then from there we'll do some quick questions afterwards. So let's see, let me get it open here and ready to go again. So I'm sorry that didn't work out, but I am glad we tried because you just never know. Okay, so in a second, you'll see my screen. I'm going to share here. There we go. And my PowerPoint. So just to the classes, give me a thumbs up if you could see the PowerPoint when I pulled it up. Could you see me swimming under the water? All right, I see some thumbs, so that must mean we're doing well. So I started diving in 2007. I lived in Australia for a year. And my very first dive ever was on the Great Barrier Reef, which, if those of you who don't know what it is, it's pretty much one of the coolest spots you could ever dive. It's the longest barrier reef system in the world. It's visible from space, and it's all made by tiny little creatures called coral polyps. And they build up this skeleton of material, and it just goes for thousands of years. So here's a couple other pictures of me in action. This is a scuba selfie. And sometimes I go without my scuba tank, sometimes I just free dive. And this is at a lake in Australia, and there was freshwater turtles all along the bottom of the lake. So I brought this guy up to take a look at and to meet him. Sometimes I like to goof around if you find something in the water, and someone had disposed of their bike, I guess, in this lake that we train at. So it's kind of a neat little thing that we use sometimes, but I can tell you it's not easy riding the bike underwater. So I mentioned the Great Barrier Reef earlier, and we're going to look at pictures from there first. Largest living structure on the planet, over 2,300 kilometers, but it's not one whole long reef. It's 3,000 individual ones and 900 islands. And it was built up over tens of thousands of years by tiny, tiny little creatures called coral polyps. This guy here is a reef shark, Caribbean or blacktip reef shark, and lots of people ask about sharks. What's it like diving or swimming with sharks? And it's a lot like this. They don't often stick around very long. You're lucky if you get them to pose for a picture, but they are timid in a lot of cases, and they do move on pretty quickly. These are schools of parrotfish, and it's not quiet on the coral reef. The whole time you're out there, you hear crunch, 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 crunch as they're grinding up coral. And if you've ever been on a sand beach or watched these parrotfish in the water, when they poop, out comes ground up stone or sand. So when you're sitting on those nice tropical beaches, just remember that it's probably passed through a parrotfish at one time or another. Well, with Finding Dory coming out soon, why not take a look at some clownfish? And you can see them living there in their little homes, and it offers them some protection from other sea creatures. This is a giant clam, and I'm not kidding when I say giant clam. If you have a meter or a yardstick in front of you, that's how big that clam was. And it just sits there all day long filtering the water, looking for good stuff to eat. One of my favorite pictures, this is from the Great Barrier Reef, this is a green sea turtle. And if you look at it, you might be thinking, well, that doesn't look very green. And green sea turtles get their name from what they eat. They eat so much green algae that it actually colors their fat green on the inside. So green sea turtle, even though he doesn't look very green. Here's a blue-spotted stingray, just relaxing on the bottom. And these guys are pretty cool. You can see this polka dot friend here. This is a nudibranch. And they get their name because their lungs are on the outside of their body, so it means naked lungs. And if you look at the back, you can see little frills coming off, and that's where he's exchanging oxygen with the water. This is a cuttlefish, so it's almost like a combination between a squid and an octopus, and they're very curious creatures. You can see they come right up to look at the camera and to check out divers, because they're trying to figure out, just like I am, what am I looking at? What's this thing all about? So they're pretty smart and they're pretty inquisitive. This here is a scorpion fish, and you can't tell because he's lit, but beautiful camouflage. You'd swim over him 9 times out of 10 and not know he was there. And you don't want to touch him, though, because he has spines all along his body for protection, poisonous spines. So that was Australia. I've spent some time in Fiji and absolutely love my time there. Whitetip reef sharks were quite popular. You can see in the corner I got photobombed by this fish. He cut right in front of this picture. Got some more sharks on our way down the line on the dive. And then watching a few swim, glide over top. And there's all sorts of little neat things you can find. So sometimes the small things and looking around for those on a dive are just as exciting as finding the big things like a shark or a sea turtle. So it pays to always keep your eyes open. I've been diving in Mexico in a few spots. So on one side, the Gulf of Mexico side in Cozumel, and on the other side, the Pacific side in Puerto Vallarta. So in Cozumel, there's a look to the end of the dock and the dive boat that we took out each day. And these are sponges. So sponges filter the water, and they sometimes, if you look inside, they have little creatures living inside, like this arrow crab. And you can see this arrow crab is almost reaching out towards the camera, trying to figure out what's looking in my sponge. At the base of the reefs, there's lots of really cool caves that you can pass through, and this is a great example of following some divers through. And you can see it's not too enclosed. You can see there's holes in the top and light shining through. And there's another picture moving through another one. And like I say, when you dive, you keep your eyes open. Cracks and crevices, you don't know what you're going to find. And here's a beautiful example of a spotted Moray Eel. And he's not too happy about being discovered, but you take a picture and you move on. You don't want to bug the marine life for too long. This is a nurse shark, and we found him resting in a cave. So he's nocturnal, comes out at night to hunt, and during the day kind of just chills out along the bottom. And they're pretty cool. They're buccal pumpers, so they can lay on the bottom and pump oxygen over their gills. They don't need to be moving at all times, like some sharks that use ram jet ventilation. So pretty cool nurse shark. Lots of schools of fish on the coral reefs. Camouflage is very important. So you can see this stingray. If he put a little more effort to bury himself in the sand, he'd be pretty much impossible to spot. But you can see from here that he's doing a pretty good job just sitting on the surface of the sand. So some wonderful camouflage. And if you look just behind his eye, you can see where he pumps water through for air exchange for oxygen. Endemic species. So an endemic species is found nowhere else in the world, in just one spot. And this is an example. This is a splendid toadfish found only in this one spot in Cozumel. We've got another species of sea turtle, the hawksbill sea turtle. There's 7 species of sea turtles, and unfortunately all of them are endangered. So it's always great to be in the water and see some sea turtles. And there's a lot of good people working in conservation to help their populations rebound. And there's another hawksbill. This is a little baby guy. He's probably only just bigger than a dinner plate. And we did some night dives. So the day crew goes to sleep, and out comes the night crew. A whole different look to the coral reef, with lobsters coming out, different species of crabs. I don't know if you can see this, but in the top of this image, there's a nurse shark just ghosting through. And so he's up now and on the prowl for something to eat. And most fun of all was the octopus. You could follow this. I followed this guy around for quite a while as he hunted, as he changed colors, moved in and out of crevices, and looked for meals to eat. So it was really cool to watch how fluid they move and their different colorations. And you can see why they're good escape artists. They can contort their bodies to squeeze through the smallest of spaces. Another neat thing was these little worms attracted to your light. So we use a flashlight or a handheld kind of torch or spotlight, and these little worms couldn't get enough of the light, so they were following us around throughout the whole dive. This is a green moray eel. This is now, we've switched to Puerto Vallarta. You can see the water's not as clear. It's colder water, so not as clear as the water of the Gulf of Mexico. You may recognize this guy as a pufferfish, and you may know their defense mechanism is to fill with water, and those spines stick out, and it makes a pretty unappealing meal. So if you take a look at the next shot, you can see the difference. Puffs right up by filling with water, little fins still moving, and then pretty good protection from predators. Here are some more stingrays. This is a smaller species, about the size of a dinner plate, so you can see 2 of them there. And then I like to do shipwreck diving. I like to dive in Canada and the US and dive some of the shipwrecks. Our Great Lakes in Canada, we share them with the US, have thousands of shipwrecks, many of them undiscovered. So this is in Tobermory. This is a shipwreck called the Forest City, and it sits on an angle. It starts at 60 feet, and then the stern, the rear, goes all the way down to 120 feet. So you can see it's cold, clear water, but it preserves the wooden shipwrecks very well. So on one hand, you're pretty cold, but on the other hand, you're looking at beautiful wooden wrecks from up to 100 years ago and more. There's another shot kind of going along the side of the ship. And here are some divers descending. I'm in this picture. I'm the one with the torch on the bottom right. Is me coming down with my dive partner. And that's an important point about diving, is you don't want to dive alone. You always dive with a buddy or more so that you can take care of each other if something goes wrong with someone's equipment, and everybody can get to the surface safely. Scuba diving is actually a pretty safe sport. Most accidents happen when people ignore rules or don't train properly. And then here's the stern at about 155 feet of the Forest City, right down at the muck. There's another shot of it. And there's me and my dive partner. I'm on the left with the yellow torch. This is a beautiful shipwreck. This is called the Arabia, and went down, I believe, in the late 1800s, sitting upright at about 110-ish feet, and it's got this beautiful bowsprit. It's a memorable wreck if you ever do get a chance to dive on it. There's the ship's wheel, and they have a little plaque there commemorating the shipwreck. And so this picture I didn't take, but this was in North Carolina. So this is one of the best dives I've ever done. This was 118 feet deep. It was about 25 miles off the coast of North Carolina in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a German U-boat. It's a submarine. So it was depth charged by the Coast Guard in 1942 and sank. Many of the crew did escape and survive, but some did go down with the submarine. So this was during World War II, and it's sitting pretty much upright, a little list to the right, and it's a beautiful, beautiful shipwreck. There's nothing like coming down a dive line and seeing a submarine waiting for you at the bottom. It's pretty cool. And then last of all is Bimini. Bimini is in the Bahamas, little group of islands about 50, 60 miles off the coast of Florida. And I went down there with Sharks for Kids. So Sharks for Kids is an amazing group working to educate students, take them on adventures, introduce them to really cool people in the shark field, learn about our oceans. If you ever do, check out sharksforkids.com. You'll find interviews and pictures and videos and curriculum materials and activities. So I went down to visit one March break, and we saw the stingrays. This one's called the blanket. Very, very big stingray, and it gets the name blanket because it tends to just cover people up and sit on top of them. You can see him doing that right now. Here's the blanket. This is my little guy Finn. He's 3 years old. 2 in that picture, and then that's my wife Elizabeth. So she was on this trip to Bimini as well. You can see the blanket living up to her name. And this is at the Bimini Biological Field Station, so the Shark Lab. This is in the pen where they catch little lemon sharks, little nurse sharks, and they tag them and release them later so they can track their progress. You can see Finn in the background again, checking it out. Some Caribbean reef sharks. And you can see they're curious, they swim around, but they don't come too close. And the great hammerhead. So a few months of the year they come along their migration and spend some time in the shallow waters of Bimini, and they are something. You know, 10 to 12 feet, beautiful sharks. You can sit on the sandy bottom for over an hour with your scuba gear, and they swim all around. It's something to see. They swim over top, but the whole time you don't feel intimidated. They're curious, but they move on pretty quickly. And this is like rush hour. We've got 3 coming by here. And there they are going right over top. You can see how shallow it is, 20, 25 feet. And I mean, the teeth look big and scary, but unless you're a fish or a stingray hiding under the sand surface, you don't have too much to worry about with these guys. All right. So I'm going to cap it there. And again, I'm going to apologize for the change in plans today. You know, sometimes a risk trying from Papua New Guinea. Glad Mark and Conservation International were nice enough to try today and to make it happen. But yeah, it just didn't work for us today. But let's visit our classrooms joining us, and we'll grab a question from each before we log off today. So Mrs. Hilton, thank you so much for your patience. And if you guys have a question, I'd love to answer it.
Oh, you're welcome. So, what do you think might be good?
Feel free to pick somebody. I can't see them.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm picking somebody. No, I'm sorry. Here he comes.
Okay, come on up.
See, and now squat down so you can. There you go.
What's your favorite diver?
Oh, the favorite one. Well, it has to be the first one that I ever was able to dive on, because it was on the Great Barrier Reef and it was really special. It was a reef called Kelso Reef, and it was just off the coast of Townsville, the state of Queensland. So that was my favorite reef because it was my first dive, and it's also where I saw my first shark. It was a little reef shark, and most people were swimming away, but it was so little. It was only about this big. But that's the problem, is many people see sharks and they're conditioned to fear them, when really they have a lot to fear from us. We're killing about 100 million a year, especially for the fin trade and making shark fin soup. So I think it's the sharks who have to worry about us a little more than us them. That's a really good question.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Mrs. Morton's class, do you guys have a question about what I just showed you?
Nevaeh, come on up. You have to come up here now. Switch back, please. Okay, squat right down, look right here.
Have you seen it?
Big loud voice.
Have you seen a beluga whale?
A beluga whale. I have not. Living in Australia, the humpback whales migrate along the coast every year. They go up to the cold waters, or down to the cold waters in Antarctica to feed, and then they come back up to the warm waters around Australia and further up to breed and have young whales. So twice a year while I lived in Australia, you could go out every day for about a month and see these beautiful humpback whales swimming by. And they'd be, when they went one way, there'd be the big ones jumping out of the water. So these 40-foot whales throwing their whole bodies out of the water. It was incredible. And then on the way back, there was the big whales again, but then there were the little baby whales doing the exact same thing. So this massive 40-foot mother whale would throw herself out of the water, and then this little, maybe 15-foot whale would jump out after it. It was so cool. So that's the closest I've come to diving with whales, with humpback whales. But if I did go to northern Canada, I'd have a good chance of being able to snorkel or dive possibly with beluga whales. So good question. Mrs. Smith-Bischoff, does your class have a question for me?
Yes. Okay.
How do you not think with all your gear?
How do I not sink? Well, actually, scuba gear is actually really heavy. You actually, or it is heavy, but you usually wear a dry suit, which makes you a little more, or a wetsuit, which makes you more buoyant. So actually, I find it's hard to sink below the water. If I were to jump in with all my scuba gear on, I might not sink right away. So most divers use weights. They put weights in their BCD, which is a vest they wear that holds their tank. It can also inflate and deflate to help them find their balance in the water. So you actually have to wear extra weight in either a weight belt or in your BCD pockets to sink, because otherwise you'll kind of just bob at the surface. So even though scuba gear is heavy, we're still pretty buoyant, especially if we're wearing a wetsuit. So I do need weight to help me sink below the water. And depending on how thick my wetsuit is, the colder it is, the more weight I need, because my wetsuit is thicker to keep me warm. Good question. And then Mrs. Green's class, I can't see you guys, but can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I can see you now. Do you guys have a question about the pictures that I just shared and the stories?
Say it again, Jayla.
Sorry, guys, I'm just missing that question.
One more time, Jayla.
Was I scared? You know, I get that question a lot, and maybe nervous would be the word to use because it was my first time, but the second you get in that water, you feel like you can fly. It's the closest you can come to flying without actually being in a plane flying. It's so amazing, too, because the life you get to see. You're exploring a place that not a lot of people get to see. Not a lot of people are brave enough to jump in the water and sink below the waves. So not afraid, but maybe a little nervous. And within a minute of hitting the water, all those thoughts were gone. The other neat thing is, if you go for a walk in a forest, you might see a rabbit, you might see a deer, but they're running away. When you're diving, most of the marine life is pretty relaxed. You can get pretty close, you can see a lot of things. You don't ever want to touch them, but you see way more life in the ocean, especially on a coral reef, than if you're just on your average walk through the forest. So those are reasons why I really enjoy diving, and I hope every one of you maybe saw some of these pictures and you're inspired maybe to check it out when you get a little bit older, because I believe 9 or 10 you can start taking courses to start learning to dive. You can learn to dive in a swimming pool and then go from there. So maybe some of you have parents already who scuba dive, and it'll be something you can check out in the future. So Boys and girls, I wish I could stick around and answer more questions, but I do have another hangout starting soon. I want to thank you so much for your patience and for sticking around. I know this wasn't the plan. We're going to learn about manta rays from Mark, but some days you get a good signal, some days you don't. I just wish we had the poor signal on the test day and not on the actual hangout day, but you win some, you lose some. So thank you for being an awesome audience. Your teachers do have my email address if you guys do have any more questions, and I'll happily answer more questions later. But for now, if anyone else is joining later hangouts today or watching some, please stay tuned. They're going to be pretty good. We have a big lineup on the go. Your teachers can send any questions to me if you had more about scuba diving or what you saw. But other than that, guys, happy World Oceans Day. Have a great afternoon, and hopefully we can bring Mark to you guys in the new school year. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you.